Captain Marvel: Why Brie Larson's Suit Isn't Sexy box. The latest dispatch from the ever-expanding was made to seem like it had the entire franchise riding on its shoulders. In some ways, not only is it the last film released before the events of Avengers Endgame, a movie that acts as, if not a period, then at least but in the 20 films that encompass the franchise, Captain Marvel is the first to feature a solo female superhero. In a profile on This is obviously a rather melodramatic take, but if the future of female superheroes is riding on the success of Captain Marvel, then it'll look pretty different from those of the past, at least when it comes to the clothes. We know the sleek, sexy catsuits of Black Widow, Storm, and Catwoman. We've got Wonder Woman. Notably, the super suits worn by Larson in Captain Marvel are not nearly as titillating. In fact, the reason is more complicated than what many angry Marvel fans, who have waged anti-Captain Marvel campaigns on and might assume that Marvel and Larson have conspired to make the film an empty shill for woke progressivism. The real reason Captain Marvel's costume doesn't look like those of female superheroes of yore is a mix between her convoluted backstory, how illustrations of female comic book characters have evolved, and the character rights that Marvel happened to have at the time of the film's greenlighting. Oh, yeah, the history of why female superheroes were often sexified and hyper-feminine is kind of a no-brainer. For most of there's a reason costumes like those Black Widow and Wonder Woman wear remain so conspicuously sexy into the 2010s, when more women are involved with the illustrating and costuming of comic book characters. These characters have a long and now standard sartorial history. Black Widow, Wonder Woman, meanwhile, has a highly visible legacy because of Linda Carter's personification in the 1970s television series You, so much so that if Gal Gadot hadn't shown up in the first trailer for the 2017 film in at least some version of the iconic costume, she wouldn't really have felt like Wonder Woman at all. Carol Danvers, the woman who becomes the titular character in Captain Marvel, however, does not share the same real estate in the minds of the average moviegoer. She's had but the Carol Danvers that's now part of the MCU is a far more recent invention. She comes from left, whereas previous iterations of Carol Danvers back when she was Ms. Marvel depicted her in essentially a bathing suit, a domino mask, and opera gloves. Deccan Nick's version put her in a military-inspired suit that nodded to Danvers's experience in the Air Force, plus the helmet that swept Danvers's blonde hair up into a mohawk. That look was Deccan Nick, however, fought for him, and told him that if he redesigned the Captain Marvel costume for Carol Danvers and Marvel didn't buy it, that she would pay for his work herself. Luckily, Susanna Polo, the comics editor for Polygon, explains that it was this iteration that really hit with readers. There was immediately, if Captain Marvel had had a stronger backstory that had existed since the 60s or 70s, perhaps Carol Danvers's supersuit in the film would have been different. But because there's also a reason we're now seeing a solo Captain Marvel film rather than one about a more historically famous female superhero. Marvel Studios, because most of Marvel's most famous female characters are X-Men characters or Sue Storm from the Fantastic Four, she continues, both of those the film licenses belong to 20th Century Fox, which means that soon they will belong to Disney again. But in the time now that Marvel knows female superheroes can sell comic books and that we may be seeing a lot more variety. It's impossible to talk about Captain Marvel without talking about the fact that some comic book fans are very, very angry about it. We'll reveal title. The people behind these campaigns seem to delight in pitting Captain Marvel against another woman-led superhero movie currently at the box office, Alita: Battle Angel, perhaps as a defense against claims of sexism. James Woods, Captain Marvel being woman-led is not the sole reason some fans hate it. It's also not it's because Captain Marvel as a character, in her image and her personality, is emphatically not designed to appeal solely to male comics nerds. Polo explains, I think the reason they feel like Alita is approachable is that she's their idea of what women should be like, she says. She's small. Carol's also amnesiac at the beginning of the film. Polo ads, but this is also why Captain Marvel is so exciting. Whether the film is the news, but shorter, delivered straight to your inbox.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.